state president of the Maine Federation of Business and Professionals, and we would like to welcome you here this afternoon. We are very proud and supportive of the Futurama Foundation and are thrilled to co-sponsor this exciting event. You may know that the National Federation also has a foundation which we support in its effort to promote scholarships to women all over the country. But the Futurama Foundation allows us to help women right here in Maine. The two women that we are honoring this afternoon are true role models for the rest of us. I would also like to introduce to you a special guest that's in our audience, Maria Cavella, who is a past state president from Massachusetts and is a member of the National Federation's Legislative Committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Abbott. I'm Dean of Libraries here at the University of Maine at Augusta. It's indeed my pleasure to welcome you to the University of Maine at Augusta's Bennett Case Library. Congratulations to our honorees this afternoon. It's well deserved. We're very proud to have the Maine Women's Hall of Fame here at the University of Maine at Augusta Library.
Good afternoon. I'm Jean Hammond, and I am serving as president of the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation. Welcome. Thank you for participating in this special event. March is Women's History Month, and so I begin by sharing some words from the preface of this little book, What Every American Should Know About Women's History, 200 Events That Shaped Our Destiny, written by Christine Lunardini, PhD. She says, the vast majority of women who have moved through the decades have done so without the recognition they so richly deserve, and yet without their contributions to American life and culture, each generation building on the foundations laid by the previous generation, standing on their mother's shoulders, the history of America would be unrecognizable to our eyes. At the same time, it is the millions of unsung women who created the subtext out of which emerged those public women whose contributions not only helped shape the contours of American life, but sometimes helped to change its destiny. If you asked a group of people to make a list of 10 Americans who have contributed in one way or another to our history, the list would probably vary markedly from person to person. But no one would have difficulty coming up with 10 names. The list would likely contain the names of presidents, scientists, statesmen, inventors, explorers, athletes, writers, physicians, and every other possible category. And they probably would have one thing in common. It is almost certain that the vast majority of lists, if not all, would contain the names of famous men. If the same group of people were asked to name 10 women who have contributed to American history, they would have much more difficulty and would continue to fall back on those few women who did make it into the history books. Betsy Ross, Florence Nightingale, oh no, she wasn't American. And for reasons not entirely clear, Mary Todd Lincoln. While this might be a slight exaggeration, it is not too far from the truth. Since the first permanent European settlements in the New World in 1607, women have been prominently involved in all aspects of the growth and development of the nation. Without women, the colonies would have failed. The first published American author was a woman. Her poetry was published in England, by the way. Washington's army was supported thanks to money raised by women patriots. Women have fought in every single war in which America has been involved. The factory system and American industrialization depended on the labor of women. Women fueled the abolitionist movement. They helped reform the cities, and they flew thousands of missions as World War II. The amazing thing is that they managed to accomplish so much with so many limitations to their own personal freedom. For most of American history, women were not even allowed to vote. In Maine, the statewide organization of business and professional women had a dream of recognizing women who have contributed to our state's life and culture and helping all women in many ways. BPW Maine charged its past state presidents with this challenge. The formation of the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation, with its tax-free status, finally made it possible for the Maine Women's Hall of Fame to move from dream to reality. The commitment of the University of Maine at Augusta to provide this permanent home for the Hall of Fame has provided access to Maine's capital city for this impressive and important display of our history. As president of the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation, I want to recognize the positive support not only of our own business and professional women's clubs, all our members, but by the contributions of businesses that are an integral part of Maine's economy. So we thank such companies as MBNA, Skowhegan Savings Bank, Merrill Trust Company, Days Jewelers, Raymond Jones Financial Services for their monetary contributions. And today, I'm delighted to announce a new partnership with Kennebec Savings Bank. Mary Hammond, Director of Human Relations and Assistant Vice President, is here, and I'd like to invite Mary to step up here for a moment.
On behalf of Kennebec Savings Bank, we're very pleased to give a donation of $500 to the Maine Futurama Foundation. Our bank is very committed to our communities, and we look forward to working with the Maine Futurama Foundation.
This will be establishing a new annual scholarship which will be awarded to a resident from Kennebec County. And thank you to Mary and thank you to Kennebec Savings Bank. The two most vital characteristics of the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation are the awarding of scholarships to Maine women seeking to earn an education and the honoring of women who have earned their recognition in the Maine Women's Hall of Fame. And of course, the fundraising efforts that make both possible. And that brings us to this induction ceremony of the Maine Women's Hall of Fame. Today we honor two remarkable women who have surely made a difference in Maine. As we have done for 12 years, we pay an enduring tribute to these women of achievement. In celebrating with Linda Smith Dyer and Chellie Pingree, we are creating a more inclusive record of the history of the state of Maine. We're proud to honor these two women and their own history of positive action and achievement for the betterment of all women of Maine. And we appreciate all of you for your support and for your presence today. Thanks.
Good afternoon. As co-chair of the Maine Women's Hall of Fame, I would like to welcome all of you here today. We're very pleased that it is a nice sunny day and not the usual snow showers or snowstorm that we've had in the past. And I would like to personally thank our BPW Maine President, Evelyn Rowland, Dr. Thomas Abbott, Dean of Libraries at UMA, and Jean Hammond as the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation for extending their greetings to all of you today. My co-chair, Nancy Davis, will you stand with Nancy Solano, who is co-chair? And we're pleased to have so many of you here with us today. Each year's ceremony has been held here at the University of Maine at Augusta during the month of March in observance of Women's History Month. During the past 12 years, the University of Maine at Augusta has generously provided a site for the display of photographs and citations for each honoree. And I hope after the induction ceremony you'll take time to look at the previous honorees so that you will have a better understanding of the women of Maine. Now the event is held on the third Saturday in March. We hope that many of you enjoyed our earlier presentation with the speaker of Melissa McRae on It Takes a Woman, Women Shaping Public Policy. And one of the ladies that she had as a model in her book was Chellie Pingree, and it timed out just right because when we signed her up as a speaker for the program, we had no idea who our inductees would be. So that worked out just right. You never know, sometimes that does happen. And many of you took advantage of having Melissa here so that she could autograph books. And if any of you didn't get a chance to get a book or a pen, you may pick one up at the end of the induction ceremony. The sofa tea was arranged for your enjoyment today by the BPW Maine past state presidents. The Hall of Fame is dedicated to women who have met 3 specific criteria. The woman's achievement have had a significant statewide impact. The woman's achievement significantly improved the lives of women in Maine, and the woman's contribution has an enduring value for women. Nominations are submitted by a variety of organizations, businesses, or individuals. An independent panel of judges review the nominations with careful consideration to select 1 or 2 honorees to be inducted this year. This year we are honored to have 2 Maine women, Linda Smith Dyer, co-founder of the Maine Women's Lobby, who was nominated by the Board of Directors of the Maine Women's Lobby, Linda Smith Dyer, and Chellie Pingree, former Majority Leader of the Maine Senate, nominated by the Maine Center for Women, Work and Community and the Maine Equal Justice Project, Chellie Pingree. And from looking at the wall, you can see we've had honored many outstanding women in the past, and we are pleased that we have some here today with us. Gilder Nadone, who is also one of the presenters for Chellie, Eloise Vitelli, their pictures are up there, and his lowest record here, I didn't see her, she was planning to come, but she was another inductee. And we were saddened to learn of the passing of a previous inductee last month. Many of you may have remembered Brownie Shrum. She had been in a nursing home in Orono for a number of years and just passed away recently. Another previous inductee was unable to attend today, and she asked me to extend her greetings. That is Liz Crandall. She gives her congratulations to both Linda and Chellie, and she is sorry that she is not well enough to be here today. She always enjoyed the induction ceremony. She said more after the one that I was involved in because I could just sit back then and enjoy it. And I hope all of you will this afternoon. 3 people asked me to express their personal congratulations to Linda Smith Dyer. They were not able to be here, and I will just give a short message from them. One is Trish Riley, stated that she is so sorry to miss this and to please give her regards to Linda. She's in Chicago today on business. The next one is Barbara A. Cortell of Dallas, Texas, and she was giving a donation to our scholarship fund in your honor, Linda. They had gone to high school together, and Barbara stated that Linda has always been a star. And the third one is Gary Crocker, stated that he is a friend of Linda and a high school classmate also who feels blessed to have known you, Linda. He thanks us for honoring a person who truly deserves your and our recognition as a person who cares and has always tried to do the right thing. In addition, I also have letters of congratulations to read from our national representatives. The first one that I will read is from one of our previous inductees, our United States Senator, Olympia Snow. She says, "Dear friends, please accept my warmest greetings and best wishes as you gather for the Maine Women's Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Through the Maine Women's Hall of Fame, the great work that is being done by so many women in Maine receives the recognition it so richly deserves. This year's inductees are wonderful choices. Linda Smith Dyer and Senator Chellie Pingree are both inspirations for women in our state. As the Maine Senator, Chellie used her gift of leadership each day to inspire those around her. During her time in the Maine Senate, she dedicated herself to developing programs that have benefited the lives of Maine women and their families. She is recognized for her professionalism and is praised by her peers. Maine has benefited from her commitment to excellence. Equally inspiring is Linda Smith Dyer and her remarkable career. As a founder of the Maine Women's Lobby, Linda has given women a voice in Maine. She took the ball and ran when it came to making the Women's Lobby a successful and powerful presence in the state.
Her tenacity and winning spirit have made the Women's Lobby what it is today. Now, more than 20 years later, she remains an important component of the organization. These women and the fulfillment of their dreams serve as a reminder to us all that, regardless of gender, we can take our visions and develop them into our legacies. I commend you, Chellie and Linda, for all of your hard work on behalf of Maine women. You have both brought a great deal of honor to the women of our great state. I am pleased to join with your families, friends, and colleagues in expressing my appreciation for all that you do. Again, my best wishes for a successful and enjoyable ceremony. Sincerely, Olympia J. Snow, United States Senator. Next is from Tom Allen, Member of Congress. Dear friends, I appreciate the chance to extend greetings and congratulations to this year's inductees to the Maine Women's Hall of Fame, Linda Smith Dyer and Chellie Pingree. I have known both Linda and Chellie for many years, and they deserve this great honor. They have been tireless advocates for women and others whose rights and needs too often have been neglected. As a result of their efforts, the voice of Maine women have been heard on the critical issues of our times, including health care, civil rights, freedom from violence, and economic security. Their intelligence, political skills, and determination have made Maine a better place for all of us. Congratulations and best wishes. Sincerely, Tom Allen, Member of Congress. And this one is from John E. Baldacci, Member of Congress, and he wrote a separate one to each, so I'll read them separately. Dear Ms. Dyer, congratulations on being inducted into the Maine Women's Hall of Fame. This is certainly a great honor, and you should be proud of your achievements. To be recognized by the Maine Women's Hall of Fame is a testament to your work ethic and dedication to serving the state of Maine. Your efforts on behalf of your community and state will always be remembered with this induction. Again, congratulations on this honor. With best wishes, sincerely, John E. Baldacci, Member of Congress. And his other one is to Dear Chellie. Congratulations on being inducted into the Maine Women's Hall of Fame. This is certainly a great honor, and you should be proud of your achievements. To be recognized by the Maine Women's Hall of Fame is a testament to your work ethic and dedication to serving the state of Maine. Your efforts on behalf of your community and state will always be remembered with this induction. Again, congratulations on this honor. With best wishes, sincerely, John E. Baldacci, Member of Congress. And I have for each of you copies of those so that you can have them for your files. And I think it is nice if we get recognition nationally for what we're doing here in Augusta, Maine, for that by having people that work in Washington realize that we do a lot for women here in Maine, and there are many great women here. And now we will begin the presentation part of the program. And if you look at your program, you can see that we're going to be starting with Linda Smith Dyer. At this time, I'd like to introduce Janet Mills, who is the founding and current board member of the Maine Women's Lobby, an attorney with Wright and Mills, and Patricia Ryan, founding board member of the Maine Women's Lobby and current executive director of the Maine Human Rights Commission. And they will be presenting the information on Linda. Please sit back and enjoy and take in all that she has done. It's amazing what anyone can do if they put their mind to it for women. Thank you.
Do I get to use the mic? I didn't go to high school with Linda Dyer like some of the people who wrote cards here. I could have. I was in a relatively neighboring town. I have hung out with her for the better part of more than 25 years. Hung out in strange places like restaurants and bars in Houston, Texas, law school libraries in Portland, the shores of Fish River Lake up in the county, and of course the ever-present halls of the State House, where she has been an effective lobbyist over the years. Linda, to give you a straight bio, Linda was born, she was born in Monmouth a number of years ago, about the same time as I was born, and she is a true daughter of Maine. She was a farm girl in the Monmouth area who began showing cows, as Senator Nutting told me this morning, at the county fairs before she entered first grade. He recalled vividly seeing you when you were 6 years old, and he was undoubtedly about the same age, shoveling you know what and leading your favorite heifer around barns. Little did he know. She graduated from Monmouth Academy in 1966. and then went on to the University of Maine, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree and later a Master's degree as well, both in mathematics. At a time when some of us didn't know what the word was or how to spell it, and very few women actually were in the field of math or science at all. She went to school all the while raising two small children, her sons Rick and Skip. Where are they? Where'd they go? There's one of them, both of them, who are here, two brilliant young men whom she raised very well. All the while going to school, working, beginning a career, long before the term superwoman or supermom was ever used as frequently as it is now. After a stint at teaching, she worked for state government. She authored an early study for Governor Curtis on equal employment and equal programming opportunities for Maine women. And undoubtedly, this is what got her thinking about opportunities for women in Maine, or the lack thereof. Linda then went to law school, the University of Maine School of Law, graduating in 1980, and continuing in her pioneer spirit, she eventually started her own law firm in Augusta, not an easy thing to do. She became a very prominent lobbyist, representing notable clients, both paid and unpaid, and for nearly 20 years, representing interests as diverse as trial lawyers, snack food industry, and dairy farmers. And soon she became the E.F. Hutton of the State House in Augusta, becoming one of the most well-respected and listened to residents of the Hall of Flags. And I asked Steve Rowe this morning, and I ran into him, what his thoughts were about Linda Dyer, and immediately, without hesitation, said she was the most effective lobbyist he had encountered in his years in the legislature. She's known for her intelligence as a lobbyist, her knowledge, her honesty. She's been so highly respected because she always she presented both sides, didn't try to con people into thinking there was only one side to an issue, didn't try to hoodwink legislators, but played it straight and I think told it like it was. She knew, I think, that the best lobbyist in Augusta is not the slick salesperson who's pitching a product, but rather the person who's the most knowledgeable, the most open, the most patient, the most prepared, and the most honest, as Justice Marsano will attest to, also her abilities as a lobbyist. Linda had credibility as a lawyer, as a lobbyist, and a reputation for hard work, a trait no doubt instilled in her years, her earliest days on the farm. And eventually she was honored by her peers by becoming president of the Maine State Bar Association. All this, again, while raising two brilliant sons, again, Rick, Skip, and while raising her daughter, Lauren Jacobs, with her husband, Charlie, who are also here. But I got to know her long before she was a lawyer, before she lobbied, before she met Charlie, before she met Lauren. In 1977, I had the privilege of working with Linda in several areas over those years, 1977, 78. It wasn't all that long ago for many of us, but still things were a lot different 23, 24 years ago in this state. Then there was only one woman professor at the Maine Law School. There were, I believe, only two women judges, very few women in state government to speak of, no women constitutional officers, no woman had served as Speaker of the House or President of the Senate, and still none. None that I could recall had run for governor at that time, as of that time. Well, Pat Ryan was in state government doing her thing. There were few, if any, women accountants, doctors, labor leaders. There were no women in the Rotary clubs, few women in the smoke-filled rooms in Augusta, in the power centers of our state. It was a man's world. We still held second place despite the efforts of Betty Friedan and Simone de Beauvoir and Bella Abzug. Roe v. Wade was only 5 years old. Birth control was still a luxury. The Civil Rights Act was still in its infancy. Discrimination in all forms, still a fact of life. There was no Oprah, no Hillary. Though Barbara Jordan had made her mark and burst onto the national scene during the impeachment hearings in the early 70s, and Shana Alexander was busy debating James Kilpatrick every Sunday night on 60 Minutes, and Billie Jean King had taken on the king of sexism on the tennis courts. These were hollow victories, though, and domestic violence at that time was just a term that people generally thought meant terrorism at our national airports. Choice Choice didn't refer to schools or abortion. It rather referred to the option of drinking Coca-Cola or Pepsi on a Saturday night. And in this atmosphere, many of us individually had naively thought that we could lobby, that we could argue the merits of our various causes individually in the Maine state legislature. We lobbied for funding for domestic violence shelters, common sense things like displaced homemakers programs, health care for all, the Equal Rights Amendment, several times, choice. But we failed, fell flat on our faces for the most part, and didn't know why. Much has changed in the last 24 years in the state of Maine and the legislature, and much of that change is due directly to the efforts of Linda Smith Dyer. In 1977, Linda Smith Dyer took charge of the statewide women's meeting at Husson College, where we elected 19 delegates and alternates to the National Women's Conference in Houston, Texas, ranging in age from 18 to 63, although 63 sure doesn't sound so old anymore. Delegates from both parties included Lois Galgay-Rackett, was mentioned earlier, Lillian O'Brien, now a member of the legislature, myself, Merle Nelson, Paulette Dodge, Renee Talbot, Cynthia Murray-Beliveau, Kate McQueen, Nan Stone, Ann Hazelwood Brady, Harriet Crane from Rockland, and of course, and of course our fearless leader, the chair of the illustrious delegation, Linda Smith Dyer. We debated for 3 days or so the merits of various positions, various issues, and what should be the highest priorities for women in this country. And we felt really full of it when we got back from Houston, thinking we're going to make big changes now, boy, oh boy. And in 1978, we continued to lose legislation right and left. We formed another statewide conference, held another statewide conference at Colby College, and Linda participated. And that was designed to implement the principles and goals that we brought back from Houston, set for ourselves. It was at this time that we came together again to support certain fundamental legislation on behalf of women, things that seemed so vital and so obvious. How could anybody in their right minds oppose them or defeat them? Bills such as funding for domestic violence shelters. I mean, there was zero funds for shelters. Battered women's voices were unheard in the halls of the legislature. Displaced homemakers programs and the like, and health care issues. Once again, these issues failed. Not in the committees, because they always had unanimous support. Everybody came out in favor of these bills. And not after any vocal opposition at all. But they were defeated quietly and in the dead of night. Speaking of deadness, the dead of night when we weren't around. Dumped on the infamous appropriations table. We were discouraged. We were downhearted, defeated. But it was Linda who saw some light in this, who knew what we needed. Linda, who had hope and vision and foresight, knew that we had to act. It was her foresight, her stick-to-itiveness that brought about the Maine Women's Lobby, an organization I believe was the first, not only the first for Maine, but first in the country. And now, I believe, the longest surviving women's lobbying group in the country. Linda suggested, for instance, that we have $2 dues so we get as many members as possible. Do you know any organization today that can thrive on $2 a head dues? We had exciting fundraisers, like the time we got together and called Helen Reddy up in Los Angeles and got her to put on a cocktail party after her concert in Portland. We charged an outrageous fee of $10 to share a glass of wine with Helen Reddy. We raised what we thought was a huge sum of money. I think it was about $700. In any event, we secretly lobbied Jimmy Carter when he came to Bangor. He stayed at the Murray residence and gave him our list of demands on behalf of all Maine women. And we hired a lobbyist, Mary Herman, Vendine Vafiatis, people who've gone on to greater, bigger things in their own rights. We learned, though, through that effort and through Linda's inspiration, that there is strength in numbers. Linda is living proof, I believe, of the Margaret Thatcher saying, quote, if you want something said in politics, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. She's become the go-to person on women's issues, whether in the back room or the front or the forefront. She's the one who knows how to get things done. Her intelligence and hard work has always inspired us. And because of her efforts on behalf of the Maine Women's Lobby and organizing it and leading it, she was the first chair of that organization. In the last 24 years, we have seen progress. non-discrimination laws, choice bills, and defeating anti-choice bills. We have seen health care bills passed, working wages passed. We have seen help for women on welfare and for children across the state through the full-time efforts of the lobbyist of the Maine Women's Lobby, Linda's brainchild, Linda's inspiration. She's a woman with Maine roots. As I said before, she's truly a woman of Maine, a woman of whom Maine must and should be proud. She has, to me, the tenacity, the toughness of the tide, patience of an rustic farmer, the dependability of an ocean tide. 45 years ago, Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote down some of her thoughts on womanhood. She compared a woman's life to the chambers of a nautilus shell and to other produce of the sea. She found femaleness in the versatility and the art of the creatures of the ocean, in their ability to be all things to all persons, their embodiment of hope, intelligence, and industry, and what ought to be and what we can hope to be. And to the women of Maine, to the daughters, mothers, aunts, nieces, grandmothers, to the new, to the old in our state, the farmers, blanket makers, office workers, stitchers, shopkeepers, sea women, professional women, working women, and mothers. To all these women, I believe Linda Smith Dyer is truly a gift from the sea. She embodies the best of Maine women, the spirit, the hope, the hard work of our generation and of our gender. It is my privilege to introduce my friend and to introduce her for the purpose of inducting her to the Maine Women's Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Okay, but to continue the program, we do have a very short video that just gives some highlights about the women's lobby over the last 20 years.
And principals. We've been working on a lot of the same issues for a long time because they're right. And it's what women need. And even when we lose, and we do sometimes, we come back and we keep at it until the right thing happens. I think for me the word passion comes up. And the kind of passionate commitment to making sure that women's voices are part of the debate, are part of the solution, and will be heard as public policy is being developed and implemented. Enduring is the word. Through good times, through bad times, it is there, luckily, fortunately. And women's lives are different because of its persistence and endurance. '77 was the International Year of the Woman. We had a conference in Maine. We elected a delegation to go to the national conference in Houston, Texas. When we came back from that meeting, there was a group of women who wanted to see how we would be able to move forward the agenda that had been set both at the national and the state level. And one of the ways we decided to pursue that was to create the Maine Women's Lobby, a nonprofit membership-based organization whose primary and really only goal would be to have a paid lobbyist at the state legislature. During the first year, we were able to attract 1,200 members. We had membership dues of $2, but many people gave more than that. And the board was elected during the summer of 1978 and hired its first lobbyist in 1979. And has had a paid lobbyist there ever since.
Yeah, I think that by 1983, the lobby had been around for about 5 years, and we had worked very much on what people have described as women's issues, reproductive choice, some pay equity work, things that were really relegated to women's issues. And what happened, I think, in the 83, 84 period when I was there is instead of being there to represent women's issues, we really took a transition to represent women's perspective on all issues. So we got involved in the minimum wage debate. We really started to build coalitions with our friends in labor, with other women's organizations who basically were not talking to each other and did not have any coordinated response. And the women's lobby did not have its fingers geographically around the state the way many other women's organizations did. And so we came together in a coalition to try and, one, educate each other, to make sure that we could use all our resources together, especially our people resources, make sure people understood what was happening in the legislature, and I think to really do a lot of work and training for women about the fact that what was happening at the legislature was impacting their lives.
And so many times the lobby has been out there, sort of one step ahead of the curve, a little on the edge, proposing legislation that no one else would touch in the effort to move the debate ahead and raise awareness about what working women and poor women are facing out there. We almost 10 years ago was the women's lobby that put in a bill to provide occupational safety and health standards for video display terminal workers. We were laughed at for doing that because it was so far in advance of anyone thinking about high-tech workplaces and the impact they were having on workers, largely women. And despite it being sort of too far out there and pushing the envelope at the time, we did win. We won a small but very important piece that got attention on that issue. And the other example was introducing the sexual harassment awareness bill, however many, 8 years ago, I think, at this point. And that was a bill that really came from women. There were volunteers on the Women's Lobby Board that went out and conducted meetings with working women in various parts of the state. And one issue that kept that was raised again and again, was the issue of sexual harassment. We came back to Augusta, introduced that bill. The legislature was not particularly aware or excited about the issue, but we fought very hard. We brought in women who had experienced egregious harassment in the workplace, and not only raised awareness among legislators, but actually got a law in the book that said employers have to train and educate their workers, all workers, about the hazards of harassment in the workplace. And suddenly Maine was being referenced as ahead of the curve, being in the vanguard, stepping out ahead of every other state on this issue.
So there was a research component to the work that was necessary. And so in 1990, the Women's Development Institute was formed. And so it's a sister organization, works hand in hand with the lobby, but the activities are very different. The lobby focuses on lobbying, passing, or trying to prevent legislation from passing. And the Women's Development Institute focuses on education, outreach, and research.
So it was wonderful to come to Maine and find how accessible legislators were to their constituents, to find that there was a Maine commission, which unfortunately was sent down, and that there was a Maine Women's Lobby that had a full-time lobbyist at the legislature, so that when you were working with other organizations, there was always somebody there interested to help.
We have to set a list of priorities for the things that the lobby can participate in at a very intense level. And so there are 4 priority areas that we use as kind of a screen. The first area is economic justice, and that can be anything from welfare reform to the minimum wage. The next area is health care, particularly reproductive rights. We are a pro-choice organization. The third area is civil rights, And we support basic civil rights for gays and lesbians, as well as things like access to housing for parents with children. And then the fourth area is violence against women. And that can be anything from funding for battered women's projects and rape crisis centers to legal issues around notification of victims when cases are dismissed by the district attorney. We've instituted this Girls' Day at the State House. This year was our second year. We had 80 girls from all over the state spend an entire day at the legislature with a series of workshops so that they could better understand the legislative process. We had a wonderful time, and based on their evaluations, so did they. And it's our hope that by bringing young women to the State House and making it an exciting, fun experience for them, that as they grow up, they will either consider a career in the political process or just become more active citizens in their own community. The legislature is not a place where you make appointments with people for the most part. It's trying to have 30-second conversations with people as they're walking to or from somewhere. So a lot of what you do is try to find them and then have your arguments condensed to a 30-second soundbite on why this bill is important or not, getting a sense back from them whether they're with you or against you, or if they need information and they're providing that information to them. And so getting there early in the morning is important, checking the calendar in both the House and Senate to find out which bills are actually going to be debated that day on the floor of the House and Senate, picking up new bills that have been printed, going through those bills, seeing if there's anything in there that could impact on women that perhaps we weren't aware of, and then trying to talk to legislators about bills before they go into session, so that if they're voting on something, having the opportunity to have a conversation with them ahead of time to just find out either where they're at or if there are particular concerns that they have about a piece of legislation and trying to answer those concerns.
Well, it's good that it comes from a nonpartisan, non-political standpoint and really trying to weigh out some inequities that have existed for decades because of the way that women's rights have come about that really are archaic and need to be worked out, or some new challenges that the new things that are going on in our society present. And I found it very helpful to have somebody who wasn't beholden to a special interest group come forward with information. Now, I don't always agree with the women's lobby, but I do think I always look for them as a source of information, an honest and fair representation of a position.
As a policymaker, I find the efforts of the Maine Women's Lobby invaluable to the work that I do. Having someone whose presence is there every day, whose thoughts are added to the work that we do, who brings a womanist economic perspective, who brings a woman's perspective on home, family, and community into the policy making that we enact is extremely important. I need to make sure that women are up there telling their own stories, because that is the most powerful thing that legislators can hear. It's how is this particular piece of legislation going to affect real, live people in their communities? And so I see that as a huge component of what I need to do, and I take that responsibility very seriously.
I was going through a really rough time in my life at that moment. My sons and I found ourselves in a situation where we didn't have any place to turn, and I was very depressed. And I did have one of my sons in prop, and I went to a meeting that I saw a sign for on being an advocate for yourself and for your children. And I went to that meeting, and Laura Fortman from the Maine Women's Lobby was there, and I told them my story, and people just were immediately there to help me. I was able to walk into the welfare office and sign up for welfare, get food stamps, a Section 8 certificate, so we had a roof over our heads. I was able to register for school because I finally I knew where I was going to be living for a little while. And once I entered school, I became very involved. I'm on the student senate. I've been in numerous committees, and I, at one time, was managing the Center for Campus Involvement.
We build confidence. We create opportunities, we build confidence. And when the base level of confidence goes up and self-esteem goes up, everybody benefits. Not just the women and girls in Maine, but every citizen of Maine benefits from the work that we're doing.
There is no question that there is a direct link between the role the women's lobby has played and the political and legal progress women have enjoyed in the state. And at the same time, it has advocated on behalf of poor women, disenfranchised women, young women, those who are not in a position to support the lobby in ways that it needs to if it's going to continue doing this work, and who may not even know that the lobby exists, but who desperately need the lobby more than anyone else.
As a former business owner, a woman business owner, as someone who's worked on health and human service policy in difficult areas like welfare reform, I know how important it is for women to have a voice in the state legislature and to be key players in policy making and making sure the budget serves our needs and making sure all the women in the state of Maine understand how the policies that we make affect everything from their pocketbook, their future education, and their children's lives. So I am thrilled that we have a women's lobby and that it is celebrating 20 years of existence. I think we're very fortunate to have all the people who have worked on it over the years and to have had such a wonderful organization that is still with us today.
Wow. Every time I see that video, I'm reminded how far we've come. And to a large measure, how far we come is because of this woman sitting on my right, Linda Smith Dyer. Linda has done more for Maine women, for all people in Maine, than almost anyone else that I can think of. I haven't known Linda as long as some, not as long as Janet, but I've known Linda almost as long as my life has been in Maine. I moved here in 1971 and started running into Linda at various places, various activities, and most importantly over various issues soon after. Linda's involvement over the decades that she has been active with regard to advancing the causes and issues of particular importance to women has been constant and timely and strategic and dedicated. We've heard a lot about her involvement in the Maine Women's Lobby today. Before that, did you know that Linda was the interim director of the Maine Human Rights Commission for a period of time when the staff, over a disagreement with something that had happened, left, and Linda was left to come in and run the agency. Her involvement with the Maine International Commission on International Women's Year, you've heard Janet talk about a lot. Setting up that conference at Husson College in Bangor that led to the delegation being elected and Linda's chairing it and moving on to Houston and bringing back the recommendation is something that Linda was intimately involved with. Working on the State Equal Rights Amendment as the campaign director, facing the barrage of adverse and incorrect information over those last few weeks. Linda was the one at the podium. The Maine Advisory Commission to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, the Family Planning Association, and on and on. Linda Dyer has made Maine a better place for all of us to live, and I am very pleased to introduce her
to you as the next inductee of the Maine Women's Hall of Fame.
I'm sure all of you realize from the presentation from both of these fine ladies and from the video that she has certainly done a lot for people in Maine, and it is my honor to read this proclamation for her induction into the Maine Women's Hall of Fame. The Maine Federation of Business and Professional Women, the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation, and University of Maine at Augusta present the 12th Annual Maine Women's Hall of Fame Award to Linda Smith Dyer, nominated by the Maine Women's Lobby, presented the 17th day of March, the year 2001 at the University of Maine at Augusta, signed by Tom Abbott from the University of Maine at Augusta, Evelyn Rowland for the BPW Maine Federation, and Jean Hammond for the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation.
First, I'd like to thank the board of the Women's Lobby for nominating me. And second, I'd like to thank the panel for selecting me. And I accept this honor on behalf of all of the women who have participated in the development and the organization of the Women's Lobby, because there have been many contributors, and it was certainly not something that was done by me alone. I think Janet gave you most of the details of how we got to where we are. There is, by the way, a poster in back of us here, which is the poster from the meeting in Houston. Like most large gatherings, you know, there was a poster and a T-shirt. We brought them home. So, but I've always really liked that poster because it makes the women seem so sort of free and So, as Janet said, we came back from Houston energized, ready to go, ready to accomplish things, and it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. So we said, well, why isn't it happening? Well, because somebody's doing it a different way than we are. Somebody is able to be in those back rooms. Somebody knows what's going on, and we don't seem to know. Even our friends weren't telling us what was going on. So we said, all right, we'll hire a full-time lobbyist. That's no problem. And we just need an organization to be the employer. So when we reached that consensus that that was what we should do, it was sort of a fortuitous circumstance. I was in law school at the time, and in fact I was in the middle of finals between so I went to the library, supposed to be studying trusts and estates, and took out my blank paper and outlined what how you could come up with an organization like this, nonprofit corporation, board of directors, this, that, and the other thing, and shared it with Janet and other people, and they thought it was a pretty worthwhile plan. So we carried on. So we kept sharing this idea with a variety of people, and one of them I remember with, I think, Pat, you were here. You and I were in Waterville. Must have been an AAUW thing. We were talking to a group probably about International Women's Year, and we were talking about how we weren't doing very well at the legislature and so on and so forth. And Louise Smith, whom I'm sure many of you know, spoke up and said, I think it's time women put their money where their mouth is. And we said, well, we're about to give you a chance to do that. So, again, when we explained the idea, everybody seemed to concur that this was a great way to go. So it has progressed over the years, not always in a straight line, but progressed.
What it means to you to be inducted and what you have done and your feelings through the years when you were working on setting up the Maine Women's Lobby. We're very pleased to honor you here today and to have your family and a lot of your friends here, and to have a tie-in with having Chellie as part of the Maine Women's Lobby video, and having Melissa, who was our speaker, tied in with both of you. So it seemed to work out that way. And at this time, I'd like to introduce my co-chair, Nancy Adams, who will do the presentation for Chellie.
I am Nancy Davis, by the way. As this year's co-chair of the Maine Women's Hall of Fame, I'd like to begin the next section on our introduction of Chellie Pingree, former Maine Majority Leader of the Maine Senate. Chellie was nominated by the Maine Centers for Women Work and Community and the Maine Equal Justice Project. Here to speak to us about Chellie are three very remarkable women in their own rights. We'll hear from Gilda Nardone, Director of the Maine Centers for Women Work and Community, Mary Henderson, Executive Director of the Maine Equal Justice Project, and Eloise Vitelli, Associate Director of the Maine Centers for Women Work and Community. And at this time, I'd like to invite Gilda up.
I would like to also honor and recognize you. Known you from afar for a long time, and we've never been really close friends, but I respect the work that you have done and the work that the lobby has done over the years, and our organization would not be here today if it wasn't for the work of the lobby, so we're greatly appreciative. Thank you. I am deeply honored to introduce our dear friend, policy guru, and leadership mentor, Chellie Pingree. Chellie was born and grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She moved to the island community of North Haven, Maine after graduating from high school. She attended the University of Southern Maine and graduated from the College of the Atlantic with a bachelor's degree in human ecology. She returned to the island in 1977 and operated a small farm while birthing and raising her three children, Hannah, Cecily, and Asa. In 1981, Chellie started North Island Yarn, a cottage industry of hand knitters with a retail store on the island. Her business expanded to become North Island Designs, which marketed knitting kits, and pattern books nationwide, while providing employment opportunities for people on the island. She sold the business in 1993. Chellie began her political career locally. She served as a member of the North Haven Planning Board, chaired the tax assessors, chaired the school board, was a founding member of North Haven Development Corporation, a nonprofit organization that encourages new and expanding businesses, and founded the Arts and Enrichment Fund for North Haven Community School, among a number of other activities. Chellie has often said that everything she knows about economic and community development, and politics for that matter, she learned living on North Haven. She believes passionately in and speaks eloquently about sustainable development policies, the importance of clean air, clean water, and healthy ecosystems, and their interrelationships to healthy families and a healthy and vibrant Maine economy. When she was first elected to the Maine Senate in 1992, she began to put the skills she gained on the island to work in the broader arena of the Maine legislature, finding creative, practical solutions to problems and building consensus. We have a quote in our most recent annual report which embodies Chellie for me. Community is not just where you live. Community is also about who you are. Forming community is a process. It takes hard work and commitment. Community is where your heart is. I love the story Chellie tells about her first years on the island and how she came to belong. I have observed her building and nurturing many different kinds of communities over the years. Communities around policy issues, and particularly communities around women's leadership, whether it's at the local level, the state level, national or international. I have many fond memories of Chellie. Perhaps my favorite is when she came to speak with the women in our Mid-Coast leadership class, Women Making a Difference, in Thomaston. They sat entranced, listening to her story. She encouraged them to follow their passion and get involved at the local level in their own communities. And she empowered them to believe that they could. And they have. Chellie, thank you for your hard work and commitment, but most of all, thank you for sharing your generous heart.
Hi, Chellie. I miss you in the State House. So Gilda asked me to talk about Chellie's policy initiatives. And I have like two things to say about Chellie, and that is, this is a woman who pushes the political envelope. She's always like a step ahead. When, you know, what's politically popular is sort of obvious, she's way ahead of that. And it's been incredibly important for the people I represent, which is low-income people in the legislature, and since most low-income people are women, a lot of women. So let me tell you about some of the accomplishments that Chellie has achieved, and the many, many, many thousands of women in Maine who have benefited. Let me just say, as I talk about these accomplishments, virtually all of them were achieved by large team effort, which included, of course, the Maine Women's Lobby. So, well, you all remember welfare reform. In the when Clinton was first running for president, he was going to change welfare as we knew it. The stereotype in the media of low-income women couldn't have been more degrading. We all know it. Lazy, ignorant, immoral, not taking good care of your children. When the answer to that problem in Congress in 1996 was, therefore,
the only thing to do is cut off your benefits and push you into a low-wage job market, which of course cannot support your children and has no health benefits. In that environment, Congress repealed AFDC and replaced it with a block grant to the states, a block grant with significant restrictions on it, including one that essentially sent the message to states to stop helping people with post-secondary education. In this environment, we were desperate, frankly, because there were about 1,000 women on AFDC who were in college, and we were afraid they were going to be forced to drop out and go take a $5 an hour job. And so who do we go to? Of course, but Chellie, and say, so we've got an idea. Let's separate our state dollars from these terrible federal dollars and create a program. We'll call it Parents of Scholars, and continue to let these women go to college. And by the way, while we're doing it, let's get rid of the stigma around welfare. And this was at a time when being out there in front on behalf of low-income women with children who needed welfare was not exactly the real popular thing to do. And by the way, Chellie, this is a brand new federal law. There are no federal regulations that have come out, and we're not totally sure this is going to be legal. But we think it's okay. And so we did it. And we didn't do it just by we got it, of course, we got tons and tons of people into the hearing room and low-income women talking about the importance of an education. But we also did it because, for the first time, for me anyway, I was in a back room, and in that back room was Chellie Pingree. And Chellie Pingree was able, she came to the hearing, obviously, she sat through the work sessions, and she pulled the Commissioner of Human Services into her office no less than 4 times to say, this is important and it's going to happen. And it did. And today, in the course of a year, 1,600 women access a post-secondary education through the Parents of Scholars program. And more will follow. Now, the other great thing about Chellie was, of course, she understood the economics of women in poverty. And she worked for higher wages, for the minimum wage, and for what came known as the Corporate Accountability Bill. That is, if corporations were going to get significant subsidies, this was, again, sort of pushing the envelope in that environment anyway. If corporations were going to get significant subsidies, maybe they should pay a living wage. And I've got to say that there was nothing more heartening than watching Chellie on the floor of the Senate debating this and saying, you know, women on welfare, they have to turn over their pay stubs every month to prove that they're still eligible for welfare. And they have to pay it back with child support. What, corporations, are you doing to be accountable for the subsidies that you receive? And all of a sudden, I think people began to make the connection. So thank you, Chellie, for that. Now, healthcare is an incredible thing that Chellie has done there. Now, she's known mostly, she's gotten most press around the Maine RX program, which is an effort to lower the price of prescription drugs. But let me just say that she's been there the whole time in a much less public way, fighting for expansions to healthcare. For example, she served on the commission that ultimately caused the low-cost drug program for the elderly to be expanded to include disabled people who that back then were excluded unless they were over 55. We got an additional $10 million into the drug program last year as a result of her efforts on the Fund for a Healthy Maine. And most close to my heart right now, although we're now moving on to other things, is we're one of the few states in the nation that have expanded Medicaid to every parent with a minor child below 150% poverty level whether or not they've ever been on welfare, if they're out there and they're a parent, they have access to health care if their income is below 150%. 10,000 women in Maine now are accessing health care for the first time. Now on drugs, we had some fun. But Chellie started with the drugs, working on the expansions to the low-cost drug program, but also we had this we were trying to figure out how do we pay for these drugs, because as you know, the costs are skyrocketing. And of course, we weren't talking very loudly at that time about inflation, but we were worried about it. And we thought, well, you see, there's this rebate in the Medicaid program. When the drug companies participate in Medicaid, they're required to rebate a certain amount of money to the states. And we thought, well, let's just tack an additional rebate on. So we put in a bill that, actually, I think we attached it to the budget, that would add a 6 percentage points more to this rebate in order to help fund the low-cost drug program. And all of a sudden, these guys were walking around the hall with Prozac ties on. and cornering us in the lobby, and were seated outside Chelle's office. And they said, you know, this isn't good for the industry. And sort of say, well, so? Well, we passed it, but unfortunately the law prevented its implementation as well as we would have liked to, so we had to come back again. Now, the next time we came back was a year ago. And this was not us so much as Chellie and the Maine Council of Senior Citizens. And John Marvin, who at that time was head of the Maine Council of Senior Citizens, came into my office one day and said, well, we're going to do price controls on drugs. And I laughed. And then he said, and Chelle's going to sponsor it. And I thought, oh, Chellie, what are you doing? But this is where she really pushed the envelope, because the truth was, you know, back then, nobody was taking on the prescription drug companies, really, and because they're huge. But we saw, I mean, the prices were outrageous. And so John started, and a whole lot of people started these trips to Canada. And before we knew it, there was virtually the whole House and the Senate voting in favor of this bill. They couldn't not vote for it because Maine understood, and Chellie took the lead and said, prescription drug, we cannot put people at risk in order to pay for profits in prescription drug companies. So that one is a battle that's going to take a while, and Chelle's still fighting it. But we are enormously grateful to your courage in pushing those envelopes, because it's made a huge difference in a lot of people's lives.
Before I add my 2 cents worth to Chelle's life and inspiration, I would also like to own up that I actually once worked for the Maine Women's Lobby as its one and only VISTA volunteer. It was a very formative year in my life, probably put me where I am today, and was the first time that I also had an opportunity to work with Linda. So I'm doubly honored to be here today with you, Linda, as well. So I'd like to add a few words about Chelle's contributions in the areas of particularly economic development and leadership. And I have to admit that I've long been a fan of Chelle's for many years, and that I remain even today somewhat in awe of her talents, particularly her ability to get up in front of an audience and speak with barely a note. I think once I saw her having a little piece of paper where she might have scribbled something on. Nonetheless, I speak today, Chellie, out of a real sense of gratitude for what you have given me personally and professionally in the way of a role model, and in that regard for what I think you have given to all Maine's women, and also to women elsewhere in this country and abroad. I think Chellie deserves our honor today for several reasons, in addition to all that you've heard. First, for helping to bring women's voices to the economic development table. She has helped to part that sea of suits that has long reigned over economic decisions in this state as elsewhere. She deserves to be honored for the risks that she's taken and for the leader that she has been and is. And as part of that role in leadership that Chellie has taken on, she's also taken on the mantle of power. She's become and is comfortable, I believe, in her own power and has helped to guide others, myself included, to take on their power as well. I'd like to provide just a few examples from my own experience with Chellie and these arenas. First, I've been fortunate to serve with Chellie on the Economic Growth Council, which is a diverse group charged with articulating a vision and goals for Maine's economy. For the past 7 years, we've tracked the state's progress towards those goals through 58 separate performance measures. I actually have several copies of our latest report for those of you who haven't had a chance to see it. I'll put some on the table. I've stood behind Chellie on more than one occasion when this report has been presented to the public. And as often as not, Chellie would be the one to report on measures covering the infrastructure, things like the conditions of our roads and bridges, or our natural resource areas, such as the amount of conservation lands that have been set aside for public use, which this year got a gold star, or the quality of water in our rivers, which this year got a red flag due to higher levels of dioxin in the fish in those rivers. While Kevin Gildart, the co-chair of the Growth Council, would take up issues such as jobs that pay a livable wage, again, one that got a red flag this year, or income disparities in family, gender, or county, and lifelong learning, which also got a red flag this year. This break from a more traditional gender assignment has, I think, provided a subtle but important message that it has become natural and commonplace for women to speak with authority about subjects that have long been held to be primarily within the male sphere of interest. And equally, I think, to have men speak with passion about issues that have traditionally been thought of as women's issues: education, equal pay for women. Chellie's vision, in addition, has helped to shape the Council's broad interpretation of the economy to begin with, so that it is one that includes both healthy communities and healthy natural resources, and business climate, and education, and government. Her leadership on the Council and in all the other areas that have already been mentioned has opened the door for others to follow, to step into the room and to raise their voices as well. I think, as you've heard, her leadership, though, goes beyond her public performances, her role as a visible spokesperson on a range of issues, although she does that very well. Chellie also, I think you've heard, works well behind the scenes. She's a down and gritty policymaker. She knows how to negotiate, she knows the art of compromise, and she does her homework. I remember her telling of her joining the bus trip of seniors to Canada when they were going over to buy prescription drugs, so that she got firsthand experience and knowledge with that issue. I recently reread a short book on leadership in the information age by one Harlan Cleveland, where he was discussing women's contributions to leadership, describing how boys get socialized on the one hand towards action skills and girls towards consensual skills, and how these traits influence leadership styles or approaches of men and women as we grow up. The writer noted that as leaders, quote, men have to learn how to get everybody in on the act, and women have to learn that there's a limit to the utility of making people happy by consulting them. He went on to say that both men and women have to be good at both consulting and acting. And it was his sense that in this age of participatory governance, women may have the edge. It's been my observation that Chellie has mastered both the art of consulting and acting, and she uses both sets of skills as a leader. Which brings me to her final contribution, her willingness to take on the P word, or power. In spite of all the progress we've made over the years that you've heard something about here today, I think the issue of power is still one that poses some challenges to many women, and probably men too. I just want to share from my own experience in learning from Chellie about power. Several years ago, and in fact over the last 2 legislative sessions, Women Working Community had bills in the legislature seeking additional funding. Chellie was in the majority leadership position and the prime sponsor of those pieces of legislation. Now, as someone who does not spend all of her time in the hallowed halls of the state legislature, it still retains an aura of intimidation. I'll be honest about that. So I made it a habit of consulting with Chellie on a regular basis as we track the progress of our bill through the process, the legislative process. We consulted on strategy, we consulted on timing, we looked for additional supporters, and through all of that, Chellie addressed, in addition to those specific issues, my own sense of hesitation in using my own power in this regard. She kept saying things to me like, go ahead, tell your story. You've got a good program. Stand up for what you want. Don't apologize. Ask for what you want and what you need. You'll get the support. Well, we did one, we didn't on the other case. But in the process, I think I came to appreciate the use of power, and particularly how to exert my own power in ways that I hadn't up to that point. Finally, I'd like to close with a quote that I think summarizes what Chellie Pingree represents as a leader and as a woman of power. It's a quote from the Prime Minister of Jordan, of all people, who was speaking on leadership to an international leadership conference. And he said, quote, leadership is by its nature both a science and an art. A science because it consists of identifiable skills which can be developed and acquired, and an art because it also represents an état d'esprit given to articulating visions, taking risks, and pursuing goals undeterred by obstacles. Effective leadership is neither the bureaucratic exercise of routine administrative prerogatives, nor the wielding of power for its own sake. It is the visionary and wise exercise of power and achievement of common goals in the service of others. I think with Chellie Pingree we have somebody who embodies all of that, and I am very proud to know you, Chellie, and to be here today for your induction into the Maine Women's Hall of Fame.
This time I'd like Chellie to join me. On behalf of the Maine Women's Hall of Fame and the University, I'd like to present you with this certificate. I'm going to read it. The Maine Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs, the BPW Maine Futurama Foundation, and the University of Maine at Augusta present the 12th Annual Maine Women's Hall of Fame Award to Chellie Pingree, nominated by the Maine Centers for Women, Work, and Community,
and the Maine Equal Justice Project, presented March 17, 2001 at the University of Maine. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to the BPW and to all of you who nominated me and thought that I should be here, and to all of you who are here today on behalf of many, many people, and I appreciate you being here. I'm quite humbled to be up here. I've decided it's easier to actually present people with these awards than to be the recipient. And I am very humbled to be here alongside Linda, who has done so many wonderful things. I truly, as you can see in the video, have been the beneficiary of the Maine Women's Lobby and much of the great work that she's done in the State House, and am humbled by her courage for all the challenges she and her family have faced over the last year, and I'm just really, really honored to be a part of this with her. I know the afternoon is late, and you've heard really more about me than you ever needed to know. So I won't speak for a long time, but I did think about this when I was approaching this date, and thinking about, how is it that I get this great opportunity and privilege to come up here and be honored in the presence of all of you. And I thought back, as I often do, to when I was 15 or 25 or even 35, that I never imagined that I would be the majority leader of the Maine Senate, or have the opportunities to work on so many of the issues that I've worked on with these women up here and all of you in the room in many different ways, and have the privilege to represent my constituents and work on behalf of people across the state of Maine. And I thought about, how is it that that comes to me, and I get to be the one who stands here and receives this award. And of course, I began thinking about some of the women that I had learned from. And while I have learned from many, many wonderful men, we are here today talking a little bit about women as mentors and leaders. And I want to talk to you just about a couple of those people along the way. You're often asked when you serve in public office, who are your heroes, who are your mentors? And I find that it was people who came to testify at public hearings, or who worked with me in the halls of the State House, or who got to know me throughout my life and offered me pieces of advice or served as role models, not necessarily people who we see on TV or read about in magazines. And I want to tell you about a few of those. You've heard a lot about my earlier days. I did grow up in Minnesota and was kind of a rebellious teenager, and there's not any TV cameras in here, so I can say that I had some troubled times in my high school years, and there was a wonderful woman who I got to know because I was a volunteer on a hotline for runaways and people with drug problems, and an older woman used to sit next to me named Irene Whitney, and I was thinking about her because she said to me, you shouldn't be skipping school. There is something that you could do with your life because you're good at what you do and you like what you do. And I think maybe you might like this experimental high school that they started out in Massachusetts that would give you a chance to try a few different jobs and maybe go through an Outward Bound course and give you a little different perspective on life. So Irene Whitney, who's no longer alive, recommended and helped me get into that school where I met the man who became my husband and had the opportunity to move then to the state of Maine and to the island of North Haven. And as all of us know, in 1971, North Haven and the state of Maine wasn't necessarily a place opening its doors to people from away. And the community, while they had noticed I was there, wasn't necessarily sure that this young teenager was meant to be a part of the community. But there was a woman named Marion Hopkins, who's no longer in the community and alive today, who had 5 sons and a daughter, and always opened her doors to her home, even though they were struggling to get by, and she had a husband who wasn't always necessarily helpful. But she made sure that there was plenty of food on the table, and anytime I needed some advice or some help, she would be there to tell me that I should make sure and put face cream on because I would get wrinkles someday. And then as I started to have children, she'd say, well, just put a little vodka on their gums when they have teething problems and drink the rest of the glass yourself. And she taught me, even though it was painful for her, how to knit a sock. And then she said, maybe you're not really a knitter, but you could help us start a little business with knitting. I was a small farmer at the time, as you've heard, and I was raising sheep, and we had all this wool. And she said, well, why don't we get other people to knit some sweaters? She certainly was knitting all the time. And when I expanded my farm stand to be a knitting business and opened a little store in town, she sat there and ran it every day and gave me a lot of advice. And I remember the day, as the business started to grow, I got a bigger desk. It had you know, when you take 2 filing cabinets and you put a door on top of it, so it looked kind of impressive. And she came in and she said, "Ooh, who do we think we are?" So she certainly kept me humble along the way. And there was my mother, who of course, if she were here today, would be very surprised, but was very proud of me once I got through those high school years and started having my own family. My mother was a Scandinavian descent. Both of my grandparents were from either Norway or Sweden. And my grandfather had a small dairy farm in southern Minnesota, and my mom, because her mother was often sick, had to help take over the farm, feed the hired men when they came in during the day, and could do practically anything. And so when I started a small farm, my mother was so amazed and used to come out and spend a month every year helping me with the kids and teaching me how to gut chickens and pluck their feathers and can corn and raise the kids and do all kinds of wonderful things. And truly was a role model for me. She, like most Scandinavians, never let anything bother her, in spite of the fact that she had diabetes and heart disease and lost both her husband and her son to cancer. She taught me a lot about courage and how to pluck a chicken and can corn. There were a lot of other women along the way, certainly in my community, who were knitters, who had struggles, who taught me a lot about the years of their work in the community, people who served as town clerk and elected officials and got up and talked about at town meeting things that needed to be said. And I never really imagined that I would end up going into politics. I had this wonderful little business. But I came down in 1991 to, I think it was 91, I don't think it was the Women's Lobby, I think it was the Women's Fund, but somebody put on a big fundraiser with Pat Schroeder at the University of Southern Maine. And I brought my daughter, and a good friend of mine brought her daughter, and we listened to Pat Schroeder speak, and she said, you know, good people don't want to run for office anymore. No one wants to serve in public life. People get out, they want to work for a corporation. They don't want to serve people. And I thought, geez, I love being on the school board and serving in local offices, and I think it's such wonderful work. How could this possibly be? And I walked out of that hall not really thinking much more about it, but I ran into, at the time, Senator Dale McCormick and Betsy Sweet, and they said, you know, the Senate seat in your district is going to open up. You should think about running. Well, I thought, you know, I've got to meet a payroll. I have 3 young children. I live on an island of 350 people. It was a crazy idea. But I turned to my daughter, Hannah, who, I'm sorry, none of my kids could be here today, but Hannah said, I said, you know, Hannah, what do you think? That's a crazy idea. And she said, at 14, go for it, Mom. And the fact is, my children themselves have been great inspiration. My daughter, Hannah, who's now 24, works on an internet site that I have to say is actually still going. And my middle daughter, Cecily, is an Outward Bound instructor and is training for the Boston Marathon. So even though they tortured me through their teenage years, they've given me tremendous inspiration to go for it, to not be afraid, and to stand up for who you are. Then I've had this tremendous privilege and learning experience and opportunity to serve for the last 8 years in the state legislature. And although wonderful people sing my praises, I certainly came in 1992, and while I was a small business owner, I was lost in those halls and not sure about all the things I would have to do, and found myself in the first year as the chair of the Business and Economic Development Committee, with everyone looking at me as if I knew what was about to happen next. And I served with some wonderful, wonderful colleagues, people like Sharon Treat, who are here in the room, learned from all kinds of women and men who had been there before me, and learned the most from the people who were willing to come before us in our committees and tell their stories about being on welfare, or not being able to afford health care, or trying to start a business and not being able to get a loan. People who would open their hearts and their personal stories and let us hear them so that we could convince our colleagues that this was something that needed to be done, or that there were changes that had to be made. And I want to recognize one other wonderful mentor who is in the room, and that's Margaret Vaughn, who opened her home to me for the last 8 years and is about the same age as my mother. And I remember one day, I was probably in some parking lot skirmish or something, but I had dislocated my knee and came home with a cast, and Margaret and Linda, you know, immediately put me in a chair and took care of me and made sure I was all right. And I was getting ready that year to go out to my mother's 80th birthday, and I remember thinking how privileged I was, that even though my mother lived 1,000 miles away in Minnesota, that here I was almost every night coming home to the home of a woman of the same age who offered me advice and always had something cooking on her wonderful coal stove, and occasionally would tell me stories about the things in her past, like the early days of family planning, and her telling me stories about being in Connecticut and sitting at the back door of a probably illegal family planning clinic where somebody had to be ready to run out the back with the records in case the police came to pick them up. So I have been tremendously inspired by all of the people along the way who, as I said, have taken me in, taught me things, told me their stories, and learned so much from them. So as I thought about this, and as many of us say when we're blessed with such awards, you know, we don't do this alone. And as women, we never do it alone, and we struggle with how to be leaders, how to use our power, how to work together, how to meet the challenges in front of us, which only continue to grow. And I know that you know, most of what happens is because there's somebody there willing to teach you. But I do want to say one last little thing. When I was thinking about not only are there role models and the people who are willing to teach you, I was down visiting my daughter just recently, the oldest one who lives in New York City. We were coming up Lexington Avenue, and you know, if you're in New York City, you're always every few blocks seeing a sign for a psychic and fortune teller. So we thought, well, we'll just stop in and see what our poems say. So I went to see the palm reader just recently. You know, it's always good to ask a few questions. And she looked at me and she said, well, I see many things, many lines, very, very complicated life here. She said, you worry too much, which, you know, I'm in politics, we're supposed to do that. But then she said, you know, you're very lucky. And I have to say, I have been very lucky. I have been very blessed, and I am extremely grateful. Thank you for this honor and for being here today.
Thank you, Chellie, for doing so much for the women of Maine. One of our partners in the Maine Women's Hall of Fame over the past several years has been the U.S. Postal Service. At this time, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Johnson from the U.S. Postal Service.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my extreme pleasure to join you today at what is becoming an annual event for us as well, our participation in your Hall of Fame induction ceremony. I'm very proud to represent the Postal Service today at this event because in the Postal Service we have a tradition of both developing and promoting women through advancement in the Postal Service and also of honoring women in our communities. We have a very long tradition of honoring women through our postage stamps series, and it's always important to remember how far we've come today. The two women that we've honored here today, we've heard a number of very powerful stories about them, and it would not surprise me one day at all to see their faces on a postage stamp for the inspiration that they have been to the women and the people of Maine. So we honor these two women today with a framed reproduction of one of our newest stamps, honoring Hattie Caraway, the first woman in American history to be elected to the Senate. Hattie Caraway was appointed to the Senate from the state of Arkansas in 1931 following the death of her husband. In 1932, she won election on her own and was elected to 2 more 6-year terms, serving until 1945. A strong supporter of New Deal legislation, Caraway was known for her dedication and diligence. She was the first woman to chair a Senate committee and the first woman to preside formally over the Senate. The United States Stamp Program gives us the opportunity to honor women pioneers in a unique way, just as this wonderful Hall of Fame ceremony allows women in Maine to honor pioneers in many different fields. And so it is my pleasure to present these framed reproductions of the Hattie Caraway stamp to Linda Smith Dyer and to Chellie Pingree as a memento of their induction. Thank you for inviting us.
I'd like to provide you with a few closing remarks. First of all, I'd like to congratulate our newest inductees to the Maine Women's Hall of Fame, Linda Smith Dyer and Chellie Pingree. Thank you for all that you have done on behalf of women of the state of Maine. And I'd like to thank all of their families and friends for attending today. Thank you to the speakers who shared the information with us today on each of our inductees. And also to those individuals and businesses who supported the Maine Women's Hall of Fame and the BPW Futurama Foundation with their generous contributions. They are recognized in our program today. Thank you for really caring about the work of the foundation and about all of our inductees into the Hall of Fame. I'd like to thank Evelyn Rowland, BPW Maine President, and Jean Hammond, BPW Maine Futurama Foundation President, and as well to our speaker, Melissa McCrae, for her presentation today. And a special thank you to Dr. Tom Abbott and the library staff, Judith Clark, Peggy Lovelace, Jean Thomas for their assistance with the on-site preparations. And I'd like to thank the judges, and if they would stand and be recognized, Rowena Heath from the American Association of University Planners, Peggy Lovelace from the University of Maine at Augusta, and Peggy's back here. Audrey Daigle from Maine Women Working Community. I haven't seen her today. Sally Ann Parks, Maine Business and Professional Women. Lynn Kaplowitz from the Maine Family Planning Association. Sarah Walton from the League of Women Voters. I'd like to thank Elizabeth for that excellent presentation of the stamps to our inductees again for this year. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'd like to especially thank the BPW Maine past state presidents. If they would stand, please. They provided the food and refreshments for today, and we have a number of them who are in attendance. You'd stand and be recognized. And the chairperson of that committee is our incoming president-elect, BPW Maine's Jerry Martin, if she would stand. Special thank you to my co-chair for this event, Sally Ann Parks. I've had a wonderful time working on this year's event, and I hope to do it again next year as well. It's been a very enjoyable experience for me. We trust that you've had an enjoyable afternoon and that you will inform others about the Maine Women's Hall of Fame and the work of the BPW Maine Foundation in providing educational scholarships for women. It's never too early to be thinking about who you'd like to nominate for next year. So it's never too early to start. I'd like to thank you all for coming and wish you a safe journey home. We have one more gift for our inductees, and this is a book from the Mr. Paperback of Waterville, and it's Joan London's Making the Most Out of Every Day, Regardless of What Life Throws You. Wake-up calls. Thank you all for coming.